Today, an FDA approval in lung cancer, priority reviews in liver cancer and non-Hodgkin lymphoma, and an ODAC recommendation for an epoetin alfa biosimilar. Welcome to Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus. The FDA has granted an approval to ceritinib as a frontline therapy for patients with metastatic ALK-positive non-small cell lung cancer. Patients' ALK-positive status must be determined by an FDA-approved test. The decision is based on findings from the Phase 3 ASCEND-4 trial, in which ceritinib reduced the risk of disease progression or death by 45% compared with standard chemotherapy. The median progression-free survival benefit favoring ceritinib was 8.5 months. The ORR with ceritinib was higher at 72.5% compared with 26.7% in the chemotherapy group. The median duration of response was 23.9 months versus 11.1 months, respectively. The FDA granted ceritinib an accelerated approval in April 2014 for the treatment of patients with ALK-positive advanced NSCLC who were previously treated with crizotinib. Today's FDA action also converts that second-line approval into a full approval. In hepatocellular carcinoma, the FDA has granted a priority review designation to the PD-1 inhibitor nivolumab as a treatment for patients who previously received sorafenib. The supplemental biologics application is based on safety and efficacy results from the Phase 1/2 CheckMate 040 study, which will be presented at the 2017 ASCO annual meeting. The study included escalation and expansion phases. The overall objective response rate in the escalation phase was 15%, including 3 complete responses and 4 partial responses. 5 of the 7 responses occurred with 3 months of initiating nivolumab. The median duration of response was 17 months, the median time to progression was 3.4 months, and the disease control rate was 58%. The 6-month and 9-month overall survival rates were each 66%. Also, in the dose escalation phase, the median overall survival was 15 months. In the expansion phase, the ORR was 20%, including 3 complete responses and 39 partial responses, and the disease control rate was 64%. The FDA is scheduled to make its final decision on or before September 24, 2017. The FDA also granted a priority review to axicabtagene ciloleucel, also known as KTE-C19, for transplant in eligible patients with relapsed or refractory non-Hodgkin lymphoma. The decision was based on findings from the Phase 2 ZUMA-1 study, in which the CD19-directed chimeric antigen receptor T-cell therapy demonstrated an objective response rate of 82% and a complete response rate of 54%. After 8.7 months of follow-up, 39% of patients continued to have a complete response. Regarding safety, there were 4 fatal events in the study, 3 of which were deemed related to KTE-C19. The first 2 reported were from hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis and cardiac arrest in the setting of CRS. In May, Kite Pharma, the manufacturer of the therapy, noted that a patient had died from cerebral edema in the setting of grade 3 CRS with multi-organ failure. The unrelated death was from pulmonary embolism. The FDA is scheduled to make its decision by November 29, 2017. Kite also announced plans to file for potential approval for KTE-C19 as a treatment for patients with relapsed refractory diffuse large B-cell lymphoma in Europe. The application is anticipated later this year. Finally, the FDA's Oncologic Drugs Advisory Committee voted 14-1 to recommend approving a biologics license application for epoetin Hospira, which is an epoetin alfa biosimilar. At this point, the BLA will go to the FDA for consideration. In 2015, the FDA did deny an abbreviated BLA by Hospira, the manufacturer of the biosimilar. Hospira is seeking approval of the agent to treat anemia due to chronic kidney disease, including patients on dialysis and not on dialysis, to decrease the need for red blood cell transfusion, to treat anemia in HIV-infected patients being treated with zidovudine, to treat chronic renal failure, specifically anemia caused by concomitant myelosuppressive chemotherapy in patients with non-myeloid malignancy, and to reduce the need for allogeneic red blood cell transfusions in patients with perioperative hemoglobin from more than 10 grams per deciliter to less than or equal to 13 grams per deciliter, who are at high risk for perioperative blood loss from elective non-cardiac, non-vascular surgery. While the vote was almost unanimous, several committee members did express their concerns about immunogenicity, especially in patients with HIV or cancer. Epoetin Hospira has been available in Europe since 2008 for the treatment of anemia associated with chronic renal failure, but committee members were instructed not to take those experiences into account. This week, Drs. Anna Giuliano and Richard Kim of Moffitt Cancer Center discussed separate research findings with the human papilloma vaccine and biliary tract cancer reported on a presscast held ahead of the 2017 ASCO annual meeting.
So in the United States, we have an ongoing study that is a study that represents all males and females in the United States. It's called the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey. Now this survey gives us an opportunity to monitor exactly that, the health of the nation. And so using the information and the specimens collected from the NHANES study, what the investigators found was that for the males who had been vaccinated against, or had been vaccinated with the human papillomavirus vaccine.
The BILCAP study is a study that will be presented at ASCO looking at adjuvant chemotherapy in patients with a biliary tract tumor. So this is actually a second large phase 3 study that will be presented. First study, phase 3 study, mostly done in France, was presented at GI ASCO this year. You may recall this was a randomized study to a patient with biliary tract tumor after a radical resection. We're randomized to gemcitabine plus oxaliplatin versus surveillance. In that study, the primary endpoint was recurrence-free survival. And unfortunately, the trial was negative as there was no difference between gemcitabine plus oxaliplatin versus surveillance in adjuvant setting. So this BILCAP study is a second large phase 3 study that was mostly done in UK. This was a much larger study compared to the France study, composed of about 450 patients. In this study, after surgical resections of patients with biliary tract tumor, they were actually randomized to single agent capecitabine versus observation. And the primary endpoint of the study was overall survival. And this trial was actually positive, showing that patients who got capecitabine lived about 51 months, which is close to 4 or 5 years, compared to the arm of surveillance where it was only 3 years or 36 months. There was an improvement in recurrence-free survival as well. So this is the first large randomized phase 3 study showing that there is actually a benefit of giving adjuvant chemotherapy after surgical resection.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Enclave News Network. I'm Gina Columbus.